Can promises of true democracy for Algeria be kept if no one trusts the vote? Questioning the numbers behind his own re-election, President Abdelmadjid Tebboune criticized the count that gave him almost 95% of the ballots. Now sworn in for a second term, he's promising a national dialogue on democracy. But do Algerians believe him? I'm Andreas Henke, and today's Newsmaker is Algeria. Algeria is the third biggest economy in Africa, but also one of the most isolated. After protests ended the 20-year reign of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika in 2019, there was hope that the closed-off country would open up. And with new elections, transparency and democracy would take hold. But 5 years later, President Tebboune's first term has left voters more apathetic than ever. His initial win with 95% of the vote even surpassed the victory of Russia's Vladimir Putin. Even Tebboune knew the election authorities' count couldn't be trusted. And what they'd originally said was 48% turnout is now believed to be about half that. Here's a look.
1 week after allegations of electoral fraud were made by opposition parties, Algeria's Constitutional Court has confirmed President Abdelmadjid Tebboune as the winner, even after he himself raised allegations of his own. The controversy arose after inconsistencies were reported by the National Independent Election Authority, or ANI. The authority initially reported nearly 27% voter turnout on the day of the vote, later revising that number to nearly 50%. The next day, ANI announced that less than 24% of the country's 24 million eligible voters participated. This led challengers Abdelali Hassani Sherif of the Movement of Society for Peace and Youcef Bouandel of the Socialist Forces to question the legitimacy of Tebboune's victory.
We don't recognize these results and we do not accept them. They are not real results. These results harm the country's future, the political process, and all the works that will enable the country to emerge from this situation, until the Constitutional Court examines these results in a way that preserves the country's dignity.
Algeria's political culture has a long history of external domination, from the Phoenicians to the Romans, Arabs, and the Ottomans. More recently, a period of French colonial rule culminated in a brutal war of independence that claimed the lives of more than 1.5 million Algerians. The liberation struggle and the ensuing trauma fostered a deep-seated wariness of foreign influence. Since independence in 1962, power in Algeria has rarely been won through the ballot box. Instead, a combination of military and civilian elites have maintained control. The Hirak movement in 2019 showed a glimmer of hope for democratic change, but it was cut short by the COVID-19 pandemic. Tebboune has promised to work towards building a true democracy in Algeria.
The first pledge to the Hirak movement and to the Algerian people is to make changes quickly and to demonstrate the new direction of the Algerian Republic through the Constitution. A substantial change to the Constitution, together with all those who are interested in doing so.
Tebboune's call for a recount in the latest election has been seen as an effort to maintain stability and project an image of transparency. However, it's done little to convince many who view the electoral system as deeply flawed and controlled by the military.
Whether it's these elections or the last ones on December 12, 2019, it's really the same thing. Nothing has changed. During the campaign, there are promises made, but then we discover that they are lies.
Algeria has seen an economic shift since Tebboune first took office in 2019. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine, European demand for Algerian gas surged, boosting Algeria's revenues. This windfall allowed Tebboune to expand social programs from unemployment benefits to housing. Yet, despite these economic gains, political processes remain opaque. The call for recounts and the Constitutional Court's upholding of Tebboune's victory may keep the peace for now, but the underlying issues of transparency and democratic governance persists.
So are Algeria's leaders actually interested in bringing democracy to the country, and how badly do Algerians really want that change? Joining me now to debate that and more are from Doha, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs and author of Understanding the Persistence of Competitive Authoritarianism in Algeria, Dalia Ghanem. Also from the Qatari capital, Professor of Political Science at Qatar University, Youcef Bouandel. And from Tunis, North Africa correspondent for the national news, Ghaya Ben Mbarek. Thanks so much for being with me. Let's talk first about the election quickly, because everyone seems to agree it was a foregone conclusion that Tebboune would win, which, really makes the absurdity of the vote count almost irrelevant. So, Dalia, was there anything redeeming in the election at all? Did it at all show that Algerians have a choice?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think the point of the election was for the regime to close once for all the door of the Hirak. So in 2019, when millions of Algerians took up to the street and they succeeded in throwing out President Bouteflika, and the generals in a way took over the governing and the ruling of the country. This lasted for almost 2 years, but again, Tebboune was poorly elected, and Algerians were not really happy with their president. So he suffered from a serious crisis of legitimacy. So by doing this election, I think the Algerian regime was noticing to its Algerian population, to its citizens, that this is enough. The door of the Hirak has been closed once for all.
Okay. So, Youcef, was the election basically kind of window dressing in order to manage a continuation of the regime that's in power now?
Well, it is. I mean, I agree to a certain extent with what Dalia suggested, but the door of the Hirak was almost closed in 2019. Basically, what the Algerian authorities are saying is that the constitution says that whenever the president is incapacitated, then there would be an election. Now, this election 5 years later, as the constitution stipulates, the president is elected for 5 years term in office. It's been almost 5 years since Tebboune was elected. Then this election should take place. It's facade democracy. Obviously, nobody had any doubt whatsoever that Tebboune would be elected, but Algerians are oblivious about what was going on, as evidenced by the very low turnout during this election. As far as legitimacy is concerned, I have always argued that Algerian presidents or Algerian presidents' legitimacy did not come from the ballot box. It has never come from the ballot box. Tebboune, for instance, despite lacking legitimacy in 2019, made so many promises to the Algerians. If he had fulfilled them, he would have been perceived as a legitimate president, but unfortunately, he has not. Let's not forget, if we look at the history of Algeria, Boumediene, who came to power coup d'etat, which is the most illegitimate way to come to power, is arguably the most popular president of Algeria's history.
Okay. Ghaya, let me ask you then, I mean, do you agree that it's a facade of democracy? But I'll ask you if you think it's actually what the Algerian people might want.
Yeah, I mean, lots of Algerian analysts have been seeing that these elections are just like really a way just to show the world that Algeria is trying to forge a democracy, while it is not the case on the ground. However, lots of people have told me it's true that they've really expected Tebboune to win, regardless of the ballot box or what the ballot box is going to indicate. But he remains popular amongst many Algerians, even people that have told me that they will be boycotting the ballot box, they will be boycotting the elections, they're not satisfied with the candidates, and they do not see that the two other candidates that have faced Mr. Tebboune have any chance, but they still think that he is popular amongst the general public opinion amongst Algerians.
Interesting. I mean, so do you think Ghaya, Tebboune, contested his own victory. To what end? To try to maybe make himself look more honest, in that he was also dissatisfied with the failures of the Election Commission to do an honest count?
To be honest, I cannot assume that he, like, what was his idea behind, like, issuing a common statement with the two other candidates stating that the electoral authority has issues really discrepant. There was a discrepancy in the numbers issued by the electoral committee. However, I think Tebboune, and even what we saw in his inauguration speech or his oath in his oath ceremony, is that he was like trying. This is according to what he's saying. He's trying really to push through making Algeria more democratic. He has suggested to conduct a national dialogue that would include all political and all economic, especially youth actors in the country, to really come and open a new phase, a new page with these people. But again, this is just like at this point, this is just like speculative. This is just what the regime and what the government is just saying. We do not really know what's going on the ground. Like realistically, lots of people have complained of the lack of the transparency of of how these elections have taken place. So it is really like Algeria, the political scene in Algeria for many people is still really ambiguous to a certain extent because of the assumption that there is lack of transparency really either with these elections or with the political processes in Algeria as a whole.
Right. Ambiguous is an interesting word. Let me ask Dalia, I mean, for many Algerians, is Tebboune actually just good enough? And that, you know, a lack of freedom and relative isolation through someone who's backed by the army actually keeps the country safe and stable, so perhaps it's just better than any instability or the unknowns of actually opening up the country to foreign investors, for example?
Yes, well, I'll come back on that question, but before, about the facade of democracy. Because, you know, there are a lot of categorization of Algeria, whether it's a flawed democracy, a facade of democracy, or a country in a perpetual state of transition. I think we need, and I wrote an entire book about that, we need to look at Algeria for what it is. Algeria is a semi-authoritarian regime, meaning a regime that mixes between elements of democracy. So there are elections, there are political parties, there are civil society organization, and mixes between this element of democracy and elements of authoritarianism. So there is a free press, but again, the press needs to know what are the red lines, not to go over them. There are civil society organizations, but again, there is this methodology that is about cloning the civil society organization, so making them so big that they neutralize each other. So again, it's a semi-authoritarian regime. Now about what Algerians think and the popularity of Tebboune, I think we are in a case where Algerians looking at the entire region, what's taken place in the region, it's a highly volatile region. It has, you know, the Middle East and North Africa has a lot of, you know, crisis. They feel probably, you know, that let's keep him because it's better in a way, and I will say it in this way, it's better to deal with the devil that we know than with the devil that we don't know. But one thing remains sure is that Tebboune is more popular today than he was during his first election in 2019. Whether we like it or not, he is more popular. Why? Because he was helped to a certain way by, you know, international elements such as the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic allowed Tebboune to put an end to the Hirak with the confinement measure, but he was also helped by the war in Ukraine in 2022. How Algeria was able, because the Russian gas was out of the European market, Algeria was able to step in.
Before you go too far, because I'd like to speak more about that, about the issue with the oil windfall, especially as in the context of the war in Ukraine. But let me come back to Youcef, because, you know, when we hear Dalia talk about elements of democracy, and you say it's a facade of democracy, And I asked, is it good enough? If you don't think it is, do you expect people to rise up again? Or are they comfortable enough, again, with the security, with the safety they have, and the stability that many people in the region don't want to take for granted?
Well, I do agree with what Dalia suggested or argued, because obviously Algeria, I call it a facade democracy, in the sense that it has so many elements of democracy, but it is also kind of authoritarianism. It's a mixture, and this kind of political systems have come into being over the last 30 years since the collapse of communism. Secondly, when we talk about Tebboune's popularity, obviously in Algeria there isn't enough, or there are not any serious polling polls to suggest the popularity or otherwise of Tebboune, but he is much more popular than he was. In addition to what Dalia suggested, let's not forget that Tebboune introduced certain economic measures by, for instance, giving unemployed people a salary. He increased salaries for the working people. Also, he increased the retirement paycheck. He talked about introducing some compensation for women staying at home and so on and so forth. And that's why he earned the title in Algeria of Ammi Tebboune, or what we call Uncle Tebboune. On this sense, he is quite popular, and his popularity was exasperated during this election by what I would say the unknown, or the unknown candidates. Compared to him, they do not have any political experience and so on and so forth, and it seems that Algeria would be in safer hands with Tebboune and its continuity, given what has been going on in the region, the instability in the region.
Yeah. I mean, he's had some wins. It's just questionable to see whether or not he actually follows, arguably, the trajectory of Bouteflika before him and manages to continue with those successes, or becomes, a hanger-on to just power over the longer term. But in the meantime, we have him. And Ghaya, I'll come back to you. So what does Algeria actually mean? I say we because I want to ask the larger question. What does Algeria now mean for the Maghreb under his continued leadership, for the region? How important a player is Algeria really, and does his leadership change the equation?
I mean, in the past few years, really, Algeria has come out as a player that needs to be taken into consideration, especially since Algeria's access into the UN Security Council. Tebboune has really been trying to use this point in order to gain more popularity because of all of the upheavals that exist in the region. The situation in the Maghreb is not really that stable. In summer, there was the Carthage meeting where he met with Libyan and Tunisian actors as an attempt in order to somehow revamp the Arab Maghreb Union. We need also to take into consideration the conflicts in the Sahel region, especially in northern Mali between the Azawad movement and the Malian military, in Niger with the coup, in Libya with the ongoing conflict and division between different political actors. Also with the war in Gaza, Algeria has been trying really to push towards in favor of Palestine and in favor of Gaza in the UN Security Council by calling for different emergency meetings whenever a situation really escalated. Algeria is really at this point of history, and regarding within these years, we can say that it has become quite important in the region.
Okay. Dalia, do you agree? Can we say that about Algeria? And what do you think Algeria wants on the international stage?
No, unfortunately, I'm going to disagree with Gaia because Algeria is a big country. It has a lot of potential, but it is not fulfilling its full potential. On the Libya crisis, Algeria hasn't been able to play any serious political role with the neighbor. Now, if we talk with Morocco, the situation is very bad. And by the confession of President Tebboune himself, he said on Al Jazeera that the relationship reached a point of no return, while actually Morocco has been able to secure some gains, notably with the US regarding the Western Sahara question, but also with France recently, which actually made bigger tension between Algiers and Paris. On the Sahel, Algeria has been always a great player, a mediator, but unfortunately, recently, there was some setback from the Algerian side. One in Mali. Mali has been accusing Algeria about internal interfering in its affairs. And Niger has accused Algeria of its mistreatment of migrants. And actually, ECOWAS joined the chorus accusing Algeria of allegedly turning a blind eye to Wagner in the Sahel. So again, what's left there except Tunisia? So I'm going to be very harsh because, this is a country that has a lot of potential, but unfortunately, this is a North African behemoth that is still sleeping. Unfortunately, again, in 2022, we felt like Algeria was poised for an amazing diplomatic, comeback because it organized a great, Mediterranean Games by hosting 3,000 athletes and delegation. It hosted also the Summit of Arab League. We saw also many policymakers from the EU coming and visiting Algeria for gas, including HRVP Borrell. But then again, the results are too small by comparison to the real potential of this North African behemoth.
Interesting. I mean, Youcef, do you agree that Algeria is a North African behemoth that is still sleeping, that is not living up to its potential? And does it really want to? Because if it does take that place on the international stage, plays a bigger role, it's logical that the country would have to open up more. And Algeria is not quite used to that.
Well, definitely. I mean, everybody knows that Algeria has been a very, very, very player on the regional and also in the international scene in the 60s, 70s, up to the 80s. Unfortunately, the civil war of the 90s and what happened over the last 2 decades or so meant that Algeria has not been playing the role it has played. When we talk about Algeria's role, for instance, it mediated between the conflict between Iraq and Iran in 1975. It freed American hostages from Tehran in 81 and so on and so forth. So Algeria's role in international affairs is very well documented, but unfortunately, it has been sleeping over the last 20 years or so. Like Dalia said, and I agree with her, that the potential is so big, but unfortunately, it has not achieved that. On paper, it would like to play a bigger role. For instance, Tebboune has been talking about reviving the Maghreb Arab Union without Morocco, given the problems that Algeria has with Morocco, and they have been exasperated with the relations between Morocco and Israel.
Ghaya, I want to get one last word from you because Dalia disagreed with you, but you seem to agree with her on some point. So is your vision that Algeria wants to change the equation, that maybe it has been this sleeping behemoth, but now it would like to play a better role? And is it ready to open up to the world, foreign investment, etc., or is it comfortable where it is?
I mean, I do not disagree with both of you, actually, with all of you here. I said that Algeria does want, really. It has been through like the past few years trying with Tebboune, trying to forge a position within the international community, within the Maghreb region, within Africa. It has lots of potential. It might have not have met all of these aspirations so far, but it has been trying, and that was like one of the underpinnings, I guess, of not only Tebboune but of the two other candidates during the electoral campaign. So at this point, we need really, as much as people, lots of people actually might not have been looking at Algeria as a serious player in the region, but now with lots of its stances, with lots of kind of attempts by Tebboune and by the region, people have started to really take a look at it again. It is a challenge within the current international situation, but also we need to take into consideration domestic challenges.
Okay.
Algeria is really socioeconomically, it is still facing lots of challenges. The people, as much as we do not see it on the ground, people are quite dissatisfied of how things have been turning out during the past 5 years. Employment rate within youth is still within 30%. And of course, the question of freedom and question of equality is still really...
Ghaya, I'm going to have to interrupt it there. So sorry, but we are completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of you so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.